So in front of me today is the Roland FP30X and the newcomer on the block. This is the Yamaha P225. This is their replacement to the P125 digital piano that had just a tremendous run within the industry. It was definitely one of the top sellers globally for several years. We did plenty of reviews on it and had a lot of positive things to say about the P125 in terms of the value it brought with its speaker system, which I thought was really class leading for its price point, as well as, while it had it, its USB MIDI interface. There was a second brief iteration of the 125 where they got rid of that. They have now returned to the USB MIDI interface with the 225, bringing it back in line with what the FP30X offers. So these two instruments aren't exactly apples to apples. The Roland is several $100s more, and so I go into this without necessarily the expectation that I'm looking for the Yamaha to outplay the Roland. I do figure that we're going to see some areas where the Roland is just going to outgun the Yamaha because it's like 20–30% more expensive than what the Yamaha is. On the Yamaha, we have a polyphony of 192 notes. That is driving its CFX Sound Engine that has a resonance engine, I think just a single resonance engine as well on it. It has a 4-speaker system with a total of 14 watts. There is a rear-facing speaker rather than a down-facing speaker, and 2 tweeters that are giving you some treble presentation out the front. It is equipped with 24 onboard sounds. It has the USB audio interface, which allows you to have a wired connection with the computer, so you have two-way audio coming back and forth between it. You have an onboard audio accompaniment function with 20 or so rhythm styles on there, and you also have the ability to use this with a Yamaha Remote App. It is a lightweight machine, and it's slightly slimmer and lighter than its previous iteration. Part of that is the action difference. This now uses, rather than the Grand Hammer Standard, it is the Grand Hammer Compact action, and we are going to get to that because that's probably one of the most substantive differences between this and the P125 is the action. Down here on the Roland, we've got a 256 note polyphony. There are 56 onboard sounds. This is driving 22 watts of speaker power. It is using the PHA-4 action, which is an action which Roland has been kind of perfecting and using for many, many years. And then finally, both of these instruments have wireless connectivity, but with slight differences. The Yamaha has Bluetooth audio, meaning you can stream audio to it, but from everything I can see and read, it doesn't have a Bluetooth MIDI connection. That you will need to use a wired connection through the USB cable. Down here on the Roland, it has both. It has Bluetooth audio, so you can stream audio in. It also has a Bluetooth MIDI connection, which allows you to connect to mobile MIDI applications, as well as have a wireless connection to the Roland piano app. Both have dual 1/4 inch outputs so that they can be used with PA systems. First thing we're going to cover is the action. Now, this new Yamaha GHC action definitely feels more solid, and it definitely feels a little better cushioned than the GHS actions that I have used in the past. Now, this is where I was a little surprised, but I think Yamaha, just like Casio did, has managed this very well. The compact means that they have really shortened the key stick compared to what the GHS was. And this has the benefit of losing some weight off the instrument. Also means that you can shrink the form factor a little bit. For super piano nerds, there's one big downside, and there's no way to get around this. This isn't a brand thing. This is just a straight geometry thing. When you shrink the key stick, there's no way to avoid the fact that as you get closer to the back, it's going to get a lot heavier. So the difference in weighting from here to there is going to be more dramatic on this particular keyboard versus something that's got a slightly longer key stick in it, because proportionally this is just either more or less of the total. And so you can definitely feel that there's less variability on the Roland from front to back than you can on the Yamaha. And this was something that caught a lot of people off guard when Casio really kind of pioneered this super compact action when they came out with the PXS 1000 and 3000, and they caught a bit of flack on this. I think they weren't expecting the feedback, the industry feedback that they got. So I think beginner players aren't going to feel like this is anything but a nice, comfortable action. And I think there's a bunch of reasons why the 225 isn't geared towards a professional player anyway, and they're the only ones who are really going to make a stink of this whole shortened key stick. So that's what's going on with the 225. In terms of key surface, this is a higher gloss key surface. Some people might have an aesthetic preference for that because it does stay brighter and cleaner a little bit longer. It does change slightly the key feel, and so this is a very personal thing. If you've never played a piano, period, best thing is to try and get in the store and compare it with, say, a matte finish to see if you have a preference. Now, just like the GHS, this sticks with the double sensor. It doesn't have the triple sensor, and it doesn't have escapement simulation on it. Again, these are two things very unlikely to phase people who are just entering the piano world. We get down into the Roland. This is the PHA-4 action. So a couple of differences. The PHA-4 action does have that escapement simulation, also has a triple sensor. So for people who are thinking about using this for MIDI triggering, for basic entry, and something where it's not, you know, like solo piano or something where there's just a crazy amount of nuance needed, either one of these are going to give you a nice MIDI output. For people who are focused on kind of exposed piano tracks or something where you really need a high level of accuracy, or you're going to be playing with quite a bit of staccato, that triple sensor can help out. Now, the reason I started with action, one, I usually like to start with action because to me that is your first point of connection with an instrument. It's really important, so it's always high on my priority list. But the other reason I put it first is I think that's probably the biggest reason why you still have this kind of cost difference between these two instruments. There's no question that the PHA-4 action is costing Roland more than the GHC action is costing Yamaha, and it could be the single biggest cost difference between these two pianos. So first, let's just listen to some line out sound from both the Yamaha and the Roland, and we're going to use their default piano tones. There's been no adjustments made to any of this, so it's both just factory setting. So we're on the #1 piano sound for the Roland, #1 piano sound for the Yamaha. And I'm going to start with the Yamaha, and then we'll finish with the Roland. So a lot of the differences you're hearing are actually the innate differences of the acoustic pianos these are based on. The Roland is based on the Steinway D, the Yamaha is based on their CFX. And the Steinway D, both how Roland has captured it, but just also the character of the piano, tends to be more of a mid-rangey tone. There's less of a brighter treble to the Steinway D, and especially in the top half of the piano, there tends to be more non-harmonic sound happening. It's kind of like this ambient shibber or almost like kind of an echo within the instrument, sort of like this, impulse kind of around the note. You can hear it there, kind of a And interestingly, that's not reverb. This is not something that's just happening because of either a setting or where the piano was recorded. This actually happens when you're in a very dry room and still you're just playing a Steinway up there. Schimmels do this a lot. You tend to hear a lot of color up there when you're playing the concert level Bechsteins as well. The Yamaha tends to be a cleaner, brighter, and a slightly tighter sound or a narrower sound, and so there's just less of that kind of natural ambience around the note. In terms of sort of varied tone, I think this has a slightly more dynamic tonality to it than what I've heard in prior Yamaha models of this price range. Although I would say that it's not as wide as the Roland. I think the Roland can get both darker and brighter over the course of its dynamic range. Now let's get to the speakers themselves, because I think this is really telling. The approach that Yamaha has taken here is an interesting one. There's no question that the rear-facing speakers that they now have on this instrument are going to project more direct tone towards, say, a listening audience. If this was in a small room or even a medium room, having a speaker pointed right at them is definitely going to have a clearer tone to the listener. But if you are in a situation where you're projecting to an audience, having that leaving you rather than having something that is either downward facing so you get some reflection off the floor, or having some more beefy speakers pointed back at you, sort of leaves the player in a slightly compromised situation versus what the audience is getting. Now, Yamaha is compensating for that by having these two front-facing tweeters, but in a situation like this where you're not up against a wall, it's kind of leaving the mid-range of the piano not quite as well presented to the player's ear. And obviously we've got mics here so that you can sort of hopefully pick up on what I'm hearing here as well. On the Roland, you've got sort of a set of compromises as well. There's no speakers that are either facing your audience or the player, so it's all relying on tone being projected down to the floor, and then you're getting a nice reflective ambience, which is why the Roland is using a more powerful speaker, because it needs to in order to fill a room up with an equal amount of space. Now there's parts of that that I like, because you generally get more warmth and a better bass response when you do it this way. And you can kind of get rid of some of the nasty highs that might otherwise come out of a speaker that's turned up a lot, because it's not directly hitting anybody's ear. So through some magical EQing, you can still get a pretty clear presentation to the player. So my overall takeaways are, at lower volumes, these two instruments sound a lot closer together than they do at higher volumes. When you start pressing the dynamic range up, you start to really expose both the differences in the speaker configuration and the speaker performance, as well as the source instruments. So they both actually have a fairly mellow tone when you're down in like the piano pianissimo range. And even when you're in your forte ranges, I don't notice a big difference in treble presentation in the lower half or even the lower 2/3 of these instruments. Although I do get a little bit more like around the kind of the 1K, 2K range out of this than I do out of there. Which is ironic given that, you know, I should have a little bit more coming at me through the tweeters, I would think, but. And then up in the top range, again, the difference is a lot more reduced when in a lower volume. But when I really start pushing it, then you start to get some of those character differences. And this is, you know, so subjective. You're either going to really like it, one or the other. And, you know, sometimes there's just no rhyme or reason. Your ear just gravitates towards one or the other. Moving into some of the other feature areas, I like that Yamaha has preserved their rhythm accompaniment. I always liked this as a feature of the 125, and it's still here. Now you've got that on the Roland, but only if you're using the app. And when you use the app, you actually have slightly more accompaniment rhythms to choose from, and ease of use, you know, when you're doing it, but you need the app. Here, at least, it's just on board, and it's a nice tight sound. I really enjoy, like I said, I liked what they had on the P125 before, and I think this is basically just a carryover of the exact same feature set. Now, in terms of some of the other sounds, I don't know that there's really been much of an update to like the Rhodes and strings and stuff that the Yamaha's offering. Here's a kind of a Rhodes sound. Now that's Supernatural working on the E pianos here. I think it's slightly more basic synthesis model that Yamaha's got going on for its non-acoustic piano sounds. I think it's just more of a basic sample playback with a couple of sample layers. They both have a couple of different EQ options depending on whether you've got it sitting up against a wall or on a table. This has a sound booster on it, which essentially is just turning compression on and off, so you can put some compression on if you really, really want it to punch through in a slightly noisier situation. But by and large, I think if somebody is down to these two models, or these are two models of significant interest, this is going to come down to a couple of things really. Are you an experienced player already looking for either a professional instrument or a secondary instrument, or is this your first time out? And I think that's a really important question to answer, because an experienced player, I think, is going to gravitate more towards the PHA-4 Action because of how it behaves in different parts of the key and at all dynamic ranges. I think a beginner will likely be equally happy on either one. I think it's also really important to know if you're going to be playing this with headphones primarily or speakers, and if you're going to be using the speakers a lot. I mean, obviously, best case scenario is get to a store and see if you can play these two side by side. Make sure that you've got as close to the same settings on these speakers as you possibly can to try and compare them. If you can't, then hopefully you can find some videos like this or other videos where, you know, they're going to give you a bit of an objective recorded speaker test like we've tried to do here. And that is such a personal thing, I really can't weigh into how somebody would lean one way or another. All I can say is that as soon as you get above middle volume and up, you know, from your mezzo forte range and up, the character of these two pianos in terms of how it presents through the speakers just like diverges more and more as you get up through the dynamic range. And that seems to be the case almost at virtually all parts of the instrument, not just the bass, mid-range, and upper end. So hopefully we've given you a sense of some of those differences. Hopefully you found it helpful, and if you did, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Also, please be sure to check the description for lots of links to local retailers, no matter where you are in the world, for best prices and various opportunities to pick either one of these up. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.